In Chapter 3, we're going to look a little bit at the physical and neurological development of infants and newborns. We'll get a little bit into toddlerhood as well. There's a lot more detail and some really cool information on things like nutrition and so forth in the full PowerPoint and in your text. But we're just going to hit some of the kind of like the big areas in this online lecture. So when babies are first born, we need some ways to evaluate. Are they neurologically at the place they need to be to survive and to thrive in this new environment? So one of the things we're looking for are reflexes. There are a number of reflexes that are present at birth that indicate good gestational development. But that disappear over time, which are an indicator of learned behavior. So it's really cool. Nature has us set up to instinctually do certain survival mechanisms, but then to learn how to be more specific about those behaviors or more directive about those behaviors as our brain develops and can handle more. So two big ones in this area are the rooting and sucking reflexes. Sometimes they're sort of put together as just one big reflex. But basically, this happens whenever you touch a baby anywhere near their mouth, cheeks, nose, chin. They're going to turn towards whatever is touching them, and they're going to suck on it, right? Kind of like this picture up here. Doesn't matter. Nose, suck on your fingers, bottle, breast, dog's nose, cat's tail, whatever comes nearby, they are going to turn towards it and suck on it. And the reason for this reflex, is that nutrition is of vital importance for the newborn, and if they can't suckle, then they can't live. So rooting and sucking are really, really important initial reflexes. However, they do disappear after a while, or at least they tend not to be reflexes anymore. Instead, they come under control of the infant. When they start to figure out that not everything is good to suck on, they're going to stop doing this, and they're going to be more specific. So probably pretty quickly they're going to figure out that the cat's tail and the dog's nose are not pleasant things to suck on, and they're not going to do that anymore. In fact, they're probably going to try to avoid those. But the bottle and the breast being nearby, man, that's going to be like, oh yeah, that I want. So it goes from being involuntary reflex at birth to a learned behavior over time that becomes more specific. So that's pretty cool. And there's some pictures of a number of the reflexes off to the side, and there's a description here in the chart of a number of the reflexes and when they disappear. One that does stay for life is your blink reflex, and that is because it protects our eyes. We wouldn't do well if we had to think about closing our eyes when a bug is about to fly into it. So that reflex remains for life, but the rest of them are replaced with learned behaviors if our neurological development is going as planned. So all right, so the next thing I want to look at is how to assess the overall vital processes of the child. And so for that, we use what's called the APGAR index. And APGAR is not some weird foreign language word. It is an acronym, and it represents 5 different vital functions. And we've got our little system here. Most people still use the APGAR scoring system. Some use the same system only with different words because the words are a little odd and contrived. But basically what we have here is activity. In other words, are they moving around? Are they, tensing and relaxing their muscles, things like that? Do they have a pulse? That's important. I might have put that one first, but do they have a grimace? That's the one that's sort of weird. But basically, do they react to pain? And respond in that way? Appearance, how's their skin tone? Are they nice and pink? Or are they having some trouble? And then respiration, of course, are they breathing, and so forth. And when we score them on each of these 5, they get an individual score for each category, and then a total score when you're done. So if you look at the example up here, it has them in a different order, and heart rate is first, which kind of makes sense to me. But you can either get a 0, a 1, or a 2 for each one of these categories. 0 means it's not happening. Nope, that's bad. Obviously. 1 means it's okay. It's not great, but it's doing what it needs to do, and they're not going to die right now, so they're cool. And then 2 is very good. And so you can see in this example, we got a 2 on the heart rate, which means it's working, right speed and all that cool stuff. 1 on respiration, which means they're breathing, but maybe it's irregular or shallow or something weird like that. Their muscle tone, they've got a 1, which is like, okay, they're tensing and flexing a little bit, but maybe not as much as we would expect. Got a 1 on that grimace, that irritability, response to pain. So, when we poke them with a sharp stick, which we always do at the beginning because we have a bunch of genetic tests we want to do to protect them. If they just sort of react as opposed to a real dramatic reaction, they'll probably get a 1. If they don't react at all, of course, it'll be a 0, and that's bad. Color, probably a 1 is going to mean that their fingers and their toes are still a little blue because the heart and the circulation isn't quite gotten it together, but their core is pink and all their vital organs are protected. So cool. So we add him up, he gets a 6 for his first deal. Fantastic. That means that there's nothing really majorly wrong with him, but we're probably going to check it again in about 5 minutes to kind of reassess, make sure that everything that is coming online and doing what it needs to do. So, 6 is pretty good. 5 is weird because 5 could kind of go either way. More than 7, that's great. This kid has got 2s in at least 3 areas and at least a 1 in everything, so they're cool. 4 to 6, maybe we might have some special considerations. 4 certainly would be a consideration because to get a 4, you have to have at least one thing that's a 0. That's not, one thing is not working, a vital process that is not working. That's bad. So 5 is a little weird because it can be all 1s, which is like okay, or it could be, really rare and odd, a 2 and a 0. Anytime there's a 0 in any 5, bad. Obviously 4 and less than 3, so 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0, those are bad. Something's wrong. We've got to intervene. Once we reach 5, we're probably at that, let's check it again in 5 minutes. Once we reach 10, we're good. We're done. So that's one just quick way to assess what's going on and communicate with everybody in the room, what level of care do we need for the infant. Now, the reason for checking again in 5 minutes, especially if we're stable, we've got that 5 or 6 number, is because birth is traumatic. It's not just traumatic for mom, it's traumatic for the child. I mean, the walls are coming down on you and you're being shot out of the nice, warm, quiet, protective environment that is all you have ever known into a world that is cold and loud and scary. Yeah, you're going to pause a minute. All of your vital systems are going to be, just sort of frozen up for a second. So, yeah, it's not unusual for children to be born with all 1s and then in 2 to 5 minutes have all 2s because their body has adapted to this major environmental change. So just kind of be aware of the math of that. Another scale is the Neonatal Behavioral Assessment Scale. That one's pretty cool. You can look that up on the internet. There's lots of YouTube videos of Terry Brazelton, his creator, actually doing these tests. But this is not like an immediate vital function test. There's some but it also goes deeper. So it goes beyond just what's in the APGAR to actual voluntary movement. Are their movements becoming under their control? Again, that's sort of transitioning from reflexes to learned behavior. It's going to look at their social interactions. They can't see so well, but they're still learning to focus, and is that happening? In their state, are they staying alert when they need to stay alert, and are they able to block out extraneous input and sleep when they need to sleep? So those are just two different scales that you might see used with infants in the medical environment. Speaking of sleeping and waking, this is cool. Newborns basically have 3 categories of activity. It depends on what book you read, whether it's 3 or 4. Some books combine waking activity and crying into one state because you have to be awake and active to cry, which makes sense to me. Others separate them into 2 different states. However makes sense to you is absolutely fine. But waking activity and crying, this is when they're doing like major interactions with the world. And so they're moving about, they're crying, they're cooing and communicating in those baby sounds, and they're able to adapt those sounds to get the responses they want from mom and dad. And they're really taking in a lot of information. They're experiencing their world through all of the senses. Sight, not so great, but it's pretty blurry. But it's bringing in some stuff, and it's learning how to see better all the time. So the brain is reorganizing as input comes into those eyes that don't quite know how to focus and don't know how to interpret the input. The brain starts working on it and categorizing it and learning it until 6 months from now, they can see pretty well. So this waking activity is that learning their environment. Alert inactivity is when they're calm, so they're not crying, they're not feeding, they're probably not moving around a lot, but they're still with us. Like they're attending to their environment, what's going on. This is more time for their senses to really bring in that information and for their brain to try to figure it out. So we spend about 8 hours a day, or 1/3 of our day, doing those things on average. Now, remember, average is, remember bell curve, if you did that. Average is this little chunk in the middle where most of us fall. The majority of us are average. But, some people are way below average and some people are way above average. So average is a little bitty deal in the middle of a way larger deal we call normal, in the middle of the whole deal, which we call everybody. So if you have a child and they spent way more than 8 hours awake and alert and all that kind of stuff, or way less, that's fine. That's probably in the normal range. I mean, the extremes are the only thing we really worry about at all. So these are abouts, sort of, kind of, usually, oftens we're talking about. So about 8 hours, usually, often, frequently, is in the activity category. That leaves the other 16, or 2/3 of the day, for sleeping. And you might think that the baby isn't doing anything while they sleep, but they're actually really busy. And that is indicated by the fact that it's split fairly evenly between deep sleep, restful sleep, and irregular or REM sleep. Now, if you remember REM sleep from your psychology classes, that's when dreams and neural processing happen most often. So the fact that this like 50% of their time is in REM is really indicative of neural development happening. It means the brain is processing information about half the time they're asleep. So that's really important. As adults, we might spend 10 to 20% of our sleep in REM sleep because we don't have to learn everything there is to learn about the whole world. So this is really where neurological development is happening a lot. And then the other half, the restful sleep, it's just like when we get restful sleep, body can repair, cells can grow, all that good stuff. So the 16 hours of sleeping is actually quite busy in terms of growth and development of the brain. So those are the kind of the three states, and sleeping being the majority one, but not because they're not doing anything. Another issue for infants is the chances of sudden infant death syndrome. Now there's a lot of things baby can die of, and that can hurt baby, for sure. But this one I think sticks with us the most because it's traumatic. You can do everything right, and this still happen. But one of the most important things that is sort of indicative of this possibly happening is putting baby to sleep on their stomach. It causes a lot of issues in terms of being able to breathe, not just suffocation from surrounding environment, but just the pressure of their body on their lungs and on their face really causes some difficulty in breathing when they're not developed enough to get there. But we also have high risk in low birth weight, preemies, if we have people who are smoking in and around or near the environment, overheating, don't overswaddle them, or a brainstem that's not quite got it together. All of those are risk factors, but the one that is most highly correlated, which means we don't know if it's a direct cause or not, but we know that a lot of times when we find these babies, they're on their stomach. So that means we definitely want to put them to sleep on their back. And they even came up with a cute little saying, back to sleep, so that we could remember to do that. And you also see there's a lot of environmental things we can do to help protect the child as well from that sudden death. That's certainly not something any parent wants to experience. Temperament, you might have heard that word a lot these days, talking about people's temperaments. You have the right or the wrong temperament for a certain job or political office. But what does that mean? Well, temperament, really, it's sort of like your go-to emotional state and your go-to behavioral state. It's like what you do when you're not thinking about it, you just do it. And so it's a consistent style of behavior. And it's usually pretty stable for the first couple of years. And it is thought to be, at least during those first 2 years, largely genetically driven. And it's another one of those things like the reflexes, that eventually it will become more about learned behavior. But at first, it's just sort of genetically driven and fairly stable. This is the emotion, this is the state you're going to get. And there are three common kinds. If you are lucky, you get an easy baby. Isn't that sweet? And they are extroverted and they have lots of self-control, so they fall into patterns easily, feeding schedules. They don't mind, their diaper being changed by whoever happens to be around. They'd be fed by whoever, they're just pretty cool. They like to explore, and they're just pretty chill for a baby. On the other side, you have the difficult child. And that's just mean. That's a terrible name to give a child. But it does describe the exact opposite temperament. Instead of, being comfortable around others and having a lot of self-control, they're like the opposite. They cannot control anything about themselves. They can't fall into a sleep schedule. They can't fall into a feeding schedule. They can't control their emotions. Every little change upsets them. They don't like new people or new places or new things. And so they tend to be more negative in their emotional presentation. So they can be more difficult to raise in that they take a lot more patience. However, the easy ones have their problems too, because they're easy to forget because they're quiet and calm pretty much most of the time. So, and then in between you have the slow to warm child that, you kind of never know what you're going to get. You might get a little of this or a little of that. So those are issues of temperament. when we talked about the stages of the states of the infant and the stages of sleep, REM versus non-REM, we brought up that one of those is the REM is indicative of neural development. And this is happening rapidly. In the first 3 years, you'll go from having about 25% of your brain when you were born to that by the time you're 3 years old, you're going to have about 80% of all the brain's weight, size, and function, leaving just 20% left for the rest of your life. So when we hear that birth to 3 years old is the most important time for brain development, it's because of that massive rapid growth. Not that our brain ceases to develop after that, or the development that happens after that is unimportant, but rather just the bulk that's happening. And it happens in 3 ways. One, I'm old enough to be able to say this is a relatively new idea because back when I was in college, which was a long time ago, we believed that you were born with every brain cell you were ever going to have, and you just developed them. They grew in size and strength and complication. That turned out to not be true at all. Neurogenesis is the creation of new neurons. And in that first 3 years, yep, a lot of that bulk increase is going to come from neurogenesis, creating new neurons to help support all the new information that's coming in. So that's pretty cool. There's some question as to when it stops. It certainly slows dramatically after 3 years old. We used to think it continued at least to some level, all the way through very old age, but just less and less and less. And so it became less reliable as a way to replace damaged brain cells. Some new studies suggest that this process may crap out somewhere in your late 20s or early 30s. So to be on the safe side, if you are in your late 20s or early 30s, take care of your brain because you might not have any more coming. But that's still sort of in the research phase. Another part of the bulk is this process called myelinization. And that is where those nerve cells get bundled into actual nerves and neural networks to kind of help streamline the function. Then a really cool one, this one in the middle, synaptic pruning. This is what's really going on during that REM sleep. Is during synaptic pruning, our brain basically reviews all the input it's gotten through the day and all the new connections that were made, and it starts to look for redundancies or inefficiencies and things like that. And so anything that it doesn't need to remember a certain thought, idea, skill, it'll prune away. In other words, it'll sort of just turn that neuron off. It doesn't kill it. It's not going anywhere. But it just sort of turns it off. So now the next time a whole bunch of new stuff comes in, I have available neurons to absorb that and then go through this pruning process again. So anytime that you learn something, practice something, become better at something, faster at something, synaptic pruning is happening. And that's kind of how your brain becomes more efficient in its abilities. And every time it becomes more efficient, there's more room for more learning. So those are some pretty cool things that are happening. We're also seeing the lateralization of the hemispheres happening, and the corticalization, those little wrinkles forming to kind of cram more into the brain, and the two hemispheres connected by the corpus callosum starting to interact and talk to each other about what the other side has. The right side controls the left side of your body. The left side controls the right side of your body. There is some division of important things, like the left is thought to do language and linear math and logic and things like that, and the right side is more of a three-dimensional big picture kind of deal. But the two sides, they don't work exclusively one to the other. It's all interactive to create our understanding of the world. Now, neuroplasticity is another thing. It goes back to that neurogenesis as well, and synaptic pruning. But neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to rewire itself, reorganize itself, learn new things, develop new physical structure. And so this is rampant. Of course, birth to 3 slows down as we get older. But there's two kind of sides of it. They're interactive sides. But we've got experience expectant growth. And that is sort of the growth that happens to the brain, expecting to have certain experiences. So the brain is developed and ready to hear language and learn language, and to feel textures and learn what different textures are, and so forth. Experience dependent growth is more specific, content specific. So universal, content specific, because these changes in the brain can only happen when specific experiences are present. So experience expectant growth is the ability to learn language and the recognition of sounds and the ability to interpret and repeat sounds. Experience dependent growth is the words and the language that we learn, because we can't learn specific words in specific languages unless we experience them. So they're dependent upon the experience to happen. But all of us are sort of hardwired expecting to need to do that. So being able to recognize sound is experience expectant growth. So that's some pretty neat things, and they work hand in hand to allow us to learn quickly. Also developing at this time is our motor development. And one of the biggest things we want to do with that motor development is that locomotion thing. We looked at our cartoon in chapter 1, how our movement is always changing. But we're really going from birth to 3, from being completely dependent on our parents for all of our movement to being independently moving. But in order to do that, there's a bunch of stuff that has to happen. Our central nervous system has to develop enough to send the right signals for highly complex coordinated moves. Our muscles have to become strong enough to actually be able to do that. We need to have a reason to do it. And we need environmental support. And so for walking, here's what that might look like. Central nervous system has to develop the ability to balance and perceive the world around us so that we know kind of where we're going and how to hold ourselves upright and all that cool stuff. Muscles develop to where our limbs can move with strength. You know, at first babies can't even hold their head up, let alone their whole body. So that has to happen. Babies have to have a reason to move. If everything is always brought to them, they really aren't motivated to learn to do this. So there's got to be something that they want that is out of their reach, and now they're going to be motivated to start to put these things into practice. And then, of course, encouragement. This is where all of your environmental things come in. Mom and dad, you know, holding their hands out and encouraging, putting things farther away, farther and farther away, so they have to move to get them. And all of those, you know, the toys and the walkers and all the cool stuff that we use to help make this happen. So locomotion, the ability to move around our world independently. That's really the big thing that changes it. You can move around the world being carried by your parents, but it's not nearly as cool as being able to move around the world however you want to. So this is a big development of both brain and body. Another thing that's a big development of brain and body is building your perceptual skills. Now that was part of that locomotion, that dynamic systems theory. Perception is our ability to understand what the sensations the world is sharing with us actually mean. So we bring in those sensations, and our brain sort of, you know, synaptic pruning, organizes it, modifies what it looks like to itself, creates meaningful patterns and understanding. All right, we can't have perception without the ability for sensation, though. Now, sensation, that's experience expectant growth. We all have it. You're sort of hardwired at birth, and it doesn't take but about 6 months for more specific ability to sense the world, to refine itself. Like I said, eyesight is the furthest behind. Taste and smell are pretty sophisticated at birth. But this is our ability to use our senses and take information from outside of our body and send that information to the brain, where the brain can then perceive what's happening. Now that's experience-dependent growth, because how we actually interpret those sensations will be unique to our character and our culture and our experiences. So not everybody perceives the world the same way. For example, temperature. You can all be in the same room experiencing the same temperature, but some of you will interpret that temperature or perceive that temperature as cold, some comfortable, some even hot. So that's where our personal preferences and personal ideas come into place. So sensation is a physical stimuli. It's absolute. It comes in. It is what it is. Perception is what our brain does with it to understand it, and to make sense of the world. So sensation, our eyes can take in the light waves reflecting off of that rose, and the nose can take in the scent particles evaporating into the air from the rose. Our fingers can touch and feel the thorns, and put that prickly sensation to our head. But it's only once our brain gets those signals, organizes them, and fixes them into a pattern that we actually see a rose. Until then, it's just all these different parts of the rose coming in to create the final picture. Okay, so at first, as infants, we're in our world and we're perceiving the world around us, but we don't necessarily recognize us as a part of the world. In other words, we're not a me yet. We can't recognize ourselves in the mirror because we don't understand that we are an actual being. But over time, with experience with the world and experience with mirrors, we start to figure out that, hey, I'm a me, that I really exist. And it's not just that the world is happening around me, but I'm actually part of the world. And we develop our self-concept, our beliefs of who we are, our personality, our physical characteristics, our emotions, likes, dislikes, thoughts, all that cool stuff. So there's a moment kind of when we go from just being in the world to becoming a part of the world. And the Rouge test is one way of sort of identifying when this moment has happened.
Who's that in the mirror?
This is known as a mirror self-recognition test, which may offer clues about the development of self-awareness. Without alerting the child, a mark is placed on its forehead.
Where's the baby? Where's the baby?
Usually, a baby younger than about 18 months doesn't make the connection between itself and the person in the mirror. The child may even look behind the mirror for the stranger it sees.
Hi. Hi. Dad.
But by about 18 months, there's a change in the child's awareness. Now it notices the red dot and the link between itself and the image in the mirror.
It's not red anymore.
What's not red?
My this. My head.
Over the next few years, children go on to fulfill their human birthright, constructing an increasingly sophisticated sense of self. They will have a rich and complex life of the mind, and a sense of being the central characters in their own dramas.
Okay, so step one, figure out I'm a me. Start on having a self-concept. Step two, start to understand that my brain is unique to me, and it has its own thoughts, its own knowledge, its own habits, its own perceptions, and that not everyone has the same perceptions or the same understanding of the world that I do. So at first, till about 1 year old or so, kids really just assume that their world is the world because that's all they've experienced. They really don't have enough to put it all into context. But by the time they're starting to interact with other children, 2, 3, 4 years old, they can start to kind of realize, oh, well, what I know and believe maybe is different from what my friend knows and believes. And so here's an example of, what that looks like.
You're gonna have a tea party with Play-Doh. I wanna serve myself. Here, Sarah. No!
Well, you've probably discovered that however smart your 3-year-old is, she doesn't seem able to put herself in someone else's mental shoes, to imagine how they think and what they believe. Perhaps you thought your parenting skills were to blame, but scientists suggest that understanding other minds is a skill that may not be fully developed until a child is about 4. To learn how children's social skills evolve between about 3 and 4, researchers use something called a false belief test. What do you think's in this box? Looks fairly obvious, doesn't it? Crayons. But let me show you. I filled it full of candles. All right, now I close it up again. While you and I have been having this conversation, Snoopy has been down here asleep. Doesn't know what we've talked about. But let's bring him into the conversation. Now I have another question for you. What do you think Snoopy will say if I ask him what's in this box? Crayons, obviously. What else could anybody possibly say? Well, watch this 3-year-old.
What do you think is inside this box? Okay, let's open it up and see.
Candles.
Now, you can ask the child what appears to be a very simple question about that. What did you think was inside the box when you first saw it? They say, oh, I always thought that there were candles in this box. Then you can ask them about someone else. So you can ask them about Snoopy. Snoopy's been sitting here. He hasn't seen this box. He's never seen us open it up. What does Snoopy think is inside this box?
Candles.
Children say the same thing. Snoopy will think there are candles inside of this box. And what that indicates is that the children's view of how minds work is very, very different from the view that you and I would have. Yes. Did you see it?
In the mind of the 3-year-old, everyone sees the world much the same way. There's no difference between what I think and believe and what everyone else, including Snoopy, thinks and believes. It is, in a sense, a naive and innocent view of the world, a kind of mental Eden. And then, about 4, comes the fall from grace.
Now, if you take a 4-year-old, quite typically the 4-year-old will tell you that, as a matter of fact, he thought there were crayons in the box, and then he found out that there were candles in the box. You can ask him about Snoopy, and he'll say, oh no, Snoopy will think that there are crayons in this box. Great, why will he think that?
Because it's a crayon box.
Mm-hmm, that's right, and that's going to make him think they're crayons. What's really in the box?
Candles.
Right. And then you get the 5-year-olds who are just utterly blasé and think that this is such an obvious thing, it's silly even to ask the question. What that shows is that by the time children are 4 and 5, they have a view of the mind that looks much more like our view of the mind. They understand that things can be tricky and deceptive, that you can change your mind, that things aren't always the way that they seem. And that gives them a very different vision of how the mind works and how people work.
Remember, we're sharing this. Oh, I need that. And then it's my turn.
Children who pass the false belief test now understand that other people can have different beliefs, even mistaken beliefs. Some scientists suggest that this test is further evidence of innate brain circuits specialized for reading other people's minds. They call it a theory of mind mechanism.
All right, so once we have self-awareness and a theory of mind, we're able to put these things into what is called effortful control. Now, we saw that in temperament. The easy temperament had a lot of effortful control. That's how they were able to adapt to their situation so well. And the difficult child had very little. And one of the cool things about effortful control is that we can control all kinds of things: our behaviors, our emotions, our reactions, the whole deal. And one of the coolest things or most important things of self-control is to learn delay of gratification. And it's proven to be so important that there have been a lot of studies linking early understanding of delay of gratification to later success in life. And so I have an example, a TED Talk about the marshmallow test that demonstrates delay of gratification and its effects.
I'm here because I have a very important message. I think we have found the most important factor for success. And it was found close to here, in Stanford. Psychology professor took kids that were 4 years old and put them in a room all by themselves. And he would tell the child, a 4-year-old kid, Johnny, I'm going to leave you here with a marshmallow for 15 minutes. If after I come back, this marshmallow is here, you will get another one. So you will have 2. To tell a 4-year-old kid to wait 15 minutes for something that they like is equivalent to tell us, we'll bring you coffee in 2 hours. Exact equivalent. So, what happened when the professor left the room? As soon as the door closed, 2 out of 3 ate the marshmallow. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 40 seconds, 50 seconds, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 8 minutes. Some lasted 14 and a half minutes. Couldn't do it. Could not wait. What's interesting is that 1 out of 3 would look at the marshmallow and go like this. Would look at it, put it back. They would walk around. They would play with their skirts and pants. That child already at 4 understood the most important principle for success, which is the ability to delay gratification. Self-discipline, the most important factor for success. 15 years later, 14, 15 years later, follow-up study. What did they find? They went to look for these kids who were now 18 and 19, and they found that 100% of the children that had not eaten the marshmallow were successful. They had good grades, they were doing wonderful, they were happy, they had their plans, they had good relationship with the teachers, students, they were doing fine. A great percentage of the kids that ate the marshmallow, they were in trouble. They did not make it to the university, they had bad grades, some of them dropped out, a few were still there with bad grades, a few had good grades. I had a question in my mind. Would Hispanic kids react the same way as the American kids? So I went to Colombia, and I reproduced the experiment, and it was very funny. I used 4, 5, and 6 years old kids. And let me show you what happened.
Hasta para un niño de 4 años, es atractiva la idea de tener el 100% de retorno a la inversión en 15 minutos. Sin embargo, algunos de ellos, tan pronto la puerta se cerró, se comieron el marshmallow inmediatamente. Otros, en cambio, resistieron el impulso.
So, what happened in Colombia? Hispanic kids, 2 out of 3 ate the marshmallow, 1 out of 3 did not. This little girl was interesting. She ate the inside of the marshmallow. In other words, she wanted us to think that she had not eaten it, so she would get 2, but she ate it. So we know she'll be successful, but we have to watch her. Okay? She should not go into banking, for example, or work in a cash register, but she will be successful. And this applies for everything, even in sales. The salesperson that customer says, I want that, and say, okay, here you are. The person ate the marshmallow. If the salesperson said, wait a second, let me ask you a few questions to see if this is a good choice, then you sell a lot more. So this has applications in all walks of life. I end with the Koreans did this. You know what? This is so good. We want a marshmallow book for children. And we did one for children, and now it's all over Korea. They're teaching these kids exactly this principle, and we need to learn that principle here in the States because we have a big debt. We're eating more marshmallows than we're producing. Thank you so much.
Okay, so if you or your children are struggling in school or with life, you might want to find the marshmallow test book and see if that can't help you out. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next chapter.